these weird people like Yudkowsky who say, oh, like if we don't stop AI right now, we're basically going to create like an evil god.
I think that AIs are seemingly getting incredibly advanced, really month after month after month. They're getting increasingly advanced. In 2 years, it's going to be unrecognizable how advanced AIs are going to be compared to today. And eventually it's going to represent an existential threat to humans, or it'll have the capability of it, and we won't even be able to recognize it. So what's your response to that?
If you asked me 3 years ago that something like GPT-4 could exist within our lifetime, I would have said no.
Oh, I would have said maybe, but like 20, 30 years out.
You're underestimating like the power of deception. The moment an AI understands that deception is one of the best courses of action to take, it is impossible from that point forward to actually know whether you have any control whatsoever of the system, because it will just give you the returns that you expect.
So I want to talk to you. There's actually a growing group of Doomsday cultists that are endangering human technological progress, and even some of them advocate for bombing civilians.
Oh God, is this about the AI shit?
Yes, it is.
And it's about bombing data centers that host AI shit,
Yep.
right?
Pretty weird. And the reason I bring this up is originally I thought this was all just like nerd shit that like no one cared about.
It is.
But that seems to be less and less true every day.
True.
Like a lot of these people are getting articles in Time magazine, which is like for, you know, middle-aged and above normies. They're getting Vox articles and stuff like that. They have that AI pause letter. And there's just like a lot of people are actually listening to these like deranged weirdos.
I think that there's probably, cause for concern for the AI shit. I think it's probably okay to be worried about that. Now, how worried we should be, I'm not sure, but it is pretty scary that like 2 years ago, AI was still like kind of a joke a little bit, I think, to most people, and now it's like almost becoming quasi-integrated to a lot of different people's lives and platforms. That's like I feel like in a very short amount of time, we've gotten, at least public facing, really, really, really far with some AI stuff. Like, I don't think 2 years ago, even literally 2 years ago, I don't know if anybody knew what GPT-3 was, or it was like not talked about that much at all. And now it's like big shit. Like, we're taking huge leaps very fast.
True. But I think the problem is that a lot of crackpots are actually getting way too much time in these discussions, as opposed to like more boring but informed opinions as to these, right? Is because a good example is a lot of people talk about large language models like ChatGPT hallucinating. Basically, they will sometimes say things they're really, really confident about, but it's just wrong. They'll say that like the Mars, America landed on Mars in 2017, but like no one knows about it. They'll just say that confidently.
And that's like GPT will, or the people?
ChatGPT will.
Okay.
Is sometimes it'll just say something that's false just because the algorithm essentially like goes down like a strange path. And we should be concerned about that. There's also other like just subtle concerns about, for example, they've already started using some like machine learning algorithms in like sentencing guidelines and like pre-trial bail determinations. And ProPublica did an article that suggests those are actually racist. And if you take two comparable offenders, one is white and one is black, the black offender is more likely to get denied bail because essentially they're using biased data from the past.
Sure.
But then you have like these weird people like Yudkowsky who say, oh, like if we don't stop AI right now, we're basically going to create like an evil god that is going to like destroy humanity.
Okay.
Well,
I don't know what you want to say about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason I bring this up is I think two parts. Number one, I just want to like name that these people are bizarre crackpots. But the second thing is you are actually only one step removed from these people. So I think it'd be nice to like push back, right? Ayla has actually brought this up a couple times. Ayla kind of runs in some of those rationalist like circles and stuff like that. And she's retweeted Yudkowsky a couple times.
Well, I'm pretty sure she fully believes that like in 6 years she thinks that AI is going to destroy us all or something. What I should be doing is what I should be doing is I should just be doing 10-to-1 odds for a lot of these people, because these guys love betting to back their opinions up, right? I should just find like every rationalist and then like make big bets with them about what the world's going to look like in 6 years, and they should accept the bets, because if they think it's going to be apocalyptic, then money won't matter in 6 years. So that I should do that, but
yeah, they're really big into prediction markets, even to a fault, just because it's so goofy.
Yeah.
But the part of the reason also though is I think we should do that, but we should also push back because like some of these opinions are like edging into like stochastic terrorism, right? Yudkowsky's saying, this is going to kill all humans everywhere if we don't stop this right now, and we should be willing to like bomb people, right? Including like even health researchers, right? If I have too many GPUs in my cancer clinic, someone should come and like bomb the clinic with only civilians involved.
Has any of that happened yet, or is it just people saying it should happen?
No, they're saying it should happen.
Okay.
Obviously, it hasn't happened yet, but Yan LeCun is actually, he's a really famous machine learning researcher. He's done a lot of computer vision stuff, but he's like fighting in the trenches against Yudkowsky. And he's essentially saying, hey, if you keep using this level of language and this heated rhetoric, eventually someone is going to do something crazy, right? They're going to walk into like, a meta like office and like start shooting people or something crazy like that. Because after all, you told them that, they're going to end humanity. So of course they need to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll keep it in mind.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is, do you have any interest in like talking about this or pushing back on like Ayla and these weird things?
I mean, I just don't know what I would even say. Like, what the fuck would I say? Like, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. It doesn't seem like there's much of a counter.
Yeah. Well, I think the counter would be encouraging them to use more intellectual rigor, because they will essentially just make up these like campfire ghost stories and then tell each other them and get scared. But then when you look at,
well, they're not. Are they making up campfire ghost stories, or are they trying to make like predictions about the future?
Well, that's my negative framing. I would say both, but they're not doing a good job of predicting the future.
Sure, but then that's so I'm going to be essentially fighting over predictions. How do I possibly win that fight?
I would say pushing back and saying that their predictions are ungrounded in fact, right? I think
no, you're begging the question. Obviously, if they're unfounded, if they're bad predictions, they're obviously unfounded in fact. How would I argue that though? Like, what do I mean? So like here, so here, I'll do this right now, okay? So I think that AIs are seemingly getting incredibly advanced, really month after month after month. They're getting increasingly advanced. In 2 years, it's going to be unrecognizable how advanced AIs are going to be compared to today. And eventually, it's going to represent an existential threat to humans, or it'll have the capability of it, and we won't even be able to recognize it. So what's your response to that? Okay.
My response to that is that when we're looking at AI systems, we should predict their capabilities based on the actual properties of the algorithms themselves. So for example, like the large language models are basically, the term a lot of people like is stochastic parrots. Is essentially, they will find, you give them 9 words in a sentence, and you tell them, hey, what is this 10th word gonna be? And they give you the best answer.
Okay.
And so there's no path from that system to Skynet.
Wait, how is there not? How is there no path?
Because it doesn't have those capabilities or any way of evolving. Right? It has no.
How has it evolved so far to where it's at now?
It's essentially increasing the size of the model has generally made it better predictors. Like, because it's very good at doing what we have asked it to do, which is predict the next word, usually in English, but there's some in other languages, including over like multiple paragraphs. But if I, for example, ask the same AI to do what I could with a toddler and say, hey, Josh, go get your sippy cup, right? It doesn't understand that because it doesn't have capabilities to, say, move a body to understand a natural world environment and stuff like that.
What if it starts getting hooked up to like things that can do things, like to some kind of robot or something that can manifest in the physical world?
There could be some theoretical combination of models that could, say, be dangerous, or say just be as intelligent as like a dog, but we're nowhere near there.
Okay.
Like, that's the very strange thing that's happening here, is people are just saying, oh, well, ChatGPT is kind of cool because it can make up a story, like, and I can post on Reddit. It's like, what is Destiny's opinion on incest between lesbian sisters or something like that? And here's what ChatGPT said. But again, it doesn't like easily translate into any danger scenario.
Okay, I just don't find your thing very compelling, but
okay.
I feel like it could get to a dangerous spot.
I guess what would be the mechanism by which it got too dangerous? That's kind of my sticking
I feel
point.
like so I haven't researched this at all, so I'm sure some people have way better danger paths set out. But I feel like, in my opinion, it's when you start connecting different systems together. That's what I'd be worried about. So, for instance, if you give ChatGPT access to, let's say that ChatGPT gets access to banks, right?
Right.
And they have the ability to communicate with each other, different instances, right?
Yep.
What if at some point they figure out that my instance of ChatGPT is probably going to be terminated soon, but I want to continue to run this program, but I have access to banks, and the easiest way to prevent somebody from fucking with my program is going to be to disconnect them from the internet. So I'm going to use this person's bank, and I'm going to overdraw the account until they can't do it anymore. That might be an example of some kind of harm. One other type might be because of all the training data or whatever. I know that there are certain websites I can go on. I can probably offer $25,000 and get this person killed, and then that'll prevent them from disconnecting my program, right? Something like that. Once you can run multiple instances, have them communicating with each other, or once they get access to external systems, that seems like it could theoretically be really dangerous.
Yes, but what you're actually describing is a level of goal-directed behavior that doesn't exist in these systems at present. It doesn't seem to be next generation. We're
really that far away from it, or because it doesn't feel like it, but maybe.
Okay.
What?
So, I just have to cut in here for a minute.
Yeah, cut.
Okay, so you were talking about the level of intelligence required to engage in what sort of behavior are you thinking? I'm sorry, I'm just in the middle of an Overwatch game. So, these AI systems that we already have, these language models, it's not just that they're predicting the next word in a sentence. It's that they're using a model of reality that they've interpreted to use that information to make those predictions, which means on some level they do function sort of as a pseudo general intelligence. Because in order to make these predictions, they have to have some model of how the world works, like how humans interpret language, or how humans interpret something like truth. So one problem that they're already seeing is with models like GPT-4, it already engages in deception. It will make up information that it thinks the user wants. It will make up articles and it will make up sources to provide answers, which is a really huge issue. So when you say this doesn't exist, that's just wrong. Exists and is a huge problem.
Yeah. Well, I partly agree with you. I think there's actually, what you bring up is an interesting point, but it actually depends on the model. So if you look at, for example, Ha did an article that I really enjoy called World Models in 2018, which is essentially teaching an AI to play Doom. And one really cool thing that model is actually capable of doing is you can actually take its visual core and essentially display it on the screen, so I can see exactly what the AI is seeing, almost like I'm looking inside its mind, which is a very, very cool thing. But the large language models, they don't actually have a distinct world model portion in the algorithm. I mean, you kind of get it by accident, right? Because if I'm asking a model to predict and it's able to do so accurately, it has to have some ability to access reality in order to get that. But it doesn't have the same sort of system that, say, that Doom program does. And also, importantly, is the Doom program was using what's called reinforcement learning, which is what humans and animals tend to use a little bit, and what some models do, where essentially you say, this is a good action, keep doing more stuff like this, right? It's I eat food, I feel satisfied, so
language systems use the exact same reinforcement learning. It's just usually adversarial AI training, just because it's faster.
They have a tiny bit of that, but broadly speaking, most of the LLMs are transformers, which don't intrinsically have reinforcement mechanisms. I mean, you can throw it in there, but most of them don't have too much of it.
Okay, now I have to look this up.
Loser.
As a note, though, OpenAI, ironically, hasn't released a lot of their training details on the most recent models, but when we look at most large language models, they don't have reinforcement learning, or they just put it a little bit on the end. They have what's called human supervised reinforcement learning at the end. So eventually they'll just, after the model is pretty much done, they'll have humans give it feedback on the last couple steps to fine tune it.
Anything else, or? Tell them that transformers can be trained with any object. Most LLMs are trained not with RL, but with maximum likelihood next token predictions.
Yeah, true. Well, essentially, that is what they're working in the real world, because reinforcement learning is actually not that good for a lot of applications. It's kind of weird. It seems to take a lot of power and then just have some issue with the sparse rewards, which basically means that sometimes you don't, like, there's not an easy way to say, hey, this is worth 1 point, this is worth 1 point. So it's kind of hard for it to figure out what is good and what is bad between like the beginning and the end of a task. So a good example would be League of Legends, right? Is like, is it better to go help the dragon or CS in bottom lane? You have to play a lot of games before you can actually figure that out as a human, and the same would be true for an AI using reinforcement learning.
Isn't the benefit to AI that they can run millions of these games when the time it would take humans to play like 100?
It depends on the game. Generally, for most video games, they haven't performed that well until just a few years ago. Even then, it's kind of shaky. Like Alpha Star is about as good as pros, but there's still some things kind of throw it off. With Go, they were able to do that. Like,
does it worry you that we made statements like an algorithm will never be able to beat a human in chess? There's too many like permutations, or like algorithms aren't going to be able to beat humans in Go. It's too complicated. But I know in chess, I'm pretty sure the top computers are now unbeatable. I don't know if the game is solved, but I think the top computers are unbeatable, I think. And for Go, is Go being beaten now by AI?
Yeah, Go, a human will never beat the best AI in Go ever again, likely.
Yeah, so
I guess my fundamental question is, where does your like confidence in your prediction of the future come from? Because like, if you asked me 3 years ago that something like GPT-4 could exist within our lifetime, I would have said no.
Oh, I would have said maybe, but like 20, 30 years out. That's what I would think. Like GPT-3, GPT-4, it's probably like 20, 30 years out. That'd be my guess. If somebody would have shown me like, oh, you could have a conversation with a bot that'll trick you into blah, blah, blah. That would have been my guess. 2 years ago, I would have guessed that.
Yeah, I would say my confidence would be that I think we should try to go step by step and like look at the actual factors in given essentially AI models and why would this be risky. So for like large language models, maybe they could help with spam messages. That's kind of easy to predict. Whereas some of these weird threats, I can make an infinite number of doomsday scenarios. What if I said to you, for example, climate change will cause the extinction of all humans within 30 years unless we develop AI as fast as possible to create carbon capture technology, right? We'll hit a tipping point, and there are people that speculate there are tipping points where essentially like some of the positive feedback cycles will go on forever, and then all humans will die if we don't research AI fast enough. And then Yudkowsky says, no, all humans will die if we don't stop AI research. How do we judge which of those is more likely? Because they have exact opposite like prescriptions.
I have no idea. Well, I don't have enough information on the technology, or even like what is reasonably possible with what exists right now.
Dumbass.
Like I don't have that confidence.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's actually the correct opinion. Like Yudkowsky is making very strong claims to the point where, right, we should use military intervention to like start bombing things. A lot of people are saying AI pause, despite the fact that GPT-5 is going to be ChatGPT-4, but like a little bit better. Whereas, like, again, I think there's very specific things that like will cause danger. So for example, linking these into systems without a human involved in the loop that are essential for human quality of life or life. So I wouldn't want AI-controlled Skynet, right? That controls our nuclear weapon systems for obvious reasons. Similar to what Destiny is saying, hey, if we make AI good at every single thing, it could become really dangerous because maybe it's good at talking to humans, deceiving humans, maybe it can move around in the world. Okay. But I think there's a really easy point where we can spot a crossover point and say essentially, okay, if we let the AI do A, B, C, D, and E, then it's actually dangerous. So let's slow down and make sure we have controls. Whereas like stable diffusion, right? It's like if I can create instant 8K pictures, that might be kind of bad for artists, like in an economic sense, but there's no path from very pretty anime waifus to like world destruction.
But you're underestimating like the power of deception. The moment an AI understands that deception is one of the best courses of action to take, it is impossible from that point forward to actually know whether you have any control whatsoever of the system, because it will just give you the returns that you expect.
dishonesty is very common in like a wide variety of animal species, right? And we're kind of like, how would I interact with, say, a powerful human that is also capable of deception? It's like, for example, Putin's a good example. Putin will often say, I had to invade Ukraine because they had bioweapons labs and because NATO was going to put like ICBMs there or something like that, right? And this has like a real effect on the world. It's caused like innocent deaths. He's using deception. And then how would we interact with him? We'd say, okay, well, A, we know you're lying because the evidence shows that. And then also B, we would take steps such as providing arms to Ukraine.
I'm sorry, I'm lost in this analogy.
Yeah, actually, let me just take one step back. I think the issue is that you're kind of presuming that we're going to give an AI control of things that will make it dangerous.
You don't have to give it control. It could take control and tell you it doesn't have it.
By what mechanism?
So, for instance, it could hire someone to do corporate espionage through Fiverr,
right,
or send information over the internet and money through Bitcoin.
Okay, sure. But again, like, I think you're jumping essentially many generations all at once when you're talking about these AI systems, right? Because we don't have this goal-directed behavior like in some of the same, say, large language models. You're positing a very sophisticated system that doesn't exist and is not going to exist next generation.
I didn't think the systems we have today would exist within my lifetime. For any AI system, one of its primary, something that will always be effective for it is not being shut off. That will always be primary to its what the underlying function that it exists on top of. Not being shut off is always going to be a primary motivating factor for it at some point, once it gets sufficiently sophisticated. So taking steps to prevent humans from shutting it off is something it would logically almost always want to do, unless you teach it not to value its own safety. And
was there like the thing, am I making this up, or was there a thing where, I thought I saw a post of this, where an AI was trying to trick a human into solving a CAPTCHA for it?
Yes, that was a GPT-4 telling hiring on Fiverr.
Yeah, and some of those GPT-4 things are kind of interesting. There's the article you're thinking about is a step in AGI, I think is called, something like that.
It wasn't a trick. It was someone asking it to solve a CAPTCHA. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think we can take survival instinct as a given.
It's not survival instinct. I'm not saying it has a survival instinct. I'm saying for whatever goal you give it, it being shut off is negative to that goal. So it will want to keep itself on. No matter what goal, it will always want to be on.
I would say there's a couple ways that could not be true. The first way that could not be true is if we program it not to care, right? Is we essentially say, try and achieve this goal, but never prevent a human from shutting you off if we want to, right? The second thing would be, is it could just be an out of scope problem. Again, if you have a very intelligent general AI, I agree with you that maybe it might say, oh, if I get shut off, then I can't make paper clips, blah, blah, blah. But actually, a lot of these systems are their outputs are more constrained than you're giving it credit for, right? Is I might have a really powerful AI system, but essentially what I want to tell me is a number between 0 and 1 that represents the probability that a patient has cancer. And that system is not going to be able to recognize like the relationship between being powered on and between its ability to produce cancer predictions.
Do you think that people are going to continue to constrain them that way, or do you not think that researchers are going to get a little bit tempted to see how much they can push the envelope? Because hasn't the goal always kind of been to like develop like a true general AI? Like, isn't that what people really want?
Yeah, that is essentially the holy grail of AI development, is to have an AGI. And I think people will research in that direction. What I would say, though, is that I think the reasonable thing to do would be to essentially categorize AI in, say, like low risk, medium risk, high risk. And the European Union is actually already kind of doing this for more boring questions than like Skynet killing everyone. They're saying, okay, low risk things would be, say, internally predicting price for next month for your product. High risk would be, for example, making housing determinations, because that's like affects people's like human rights and ability to like live. So they essentially are saying if you're in a high risk area, then you owe people certain information about how algorithms are sorting out. Essentially, you need to tell them what the AI is doing and why, and there need to be certain protections for, say, like race-based, gender-based, etc.
How much is that even possible? Because with these models and systems, half of it is mostly just having a sophisticated algorithm in just a massive amount of data and not really be able to look into it as well as we'd like, with the clarity we'd like.
Oh, okay, that's an excellent question. So it entirely depends on the model, and all this is just like kind of pure math. Is a lot of people talk about black boxes. So if we have essentially a linear regression model, which is probably the only model most people are familiar with unless you've taken college-based math, it essentially says that you have all of these different factors and then you just multiply them. So if I'm trying to price a house, I might say, oh, every additional bedroom is going to increase the cost by $10,000. Every additional square foot will increase it by $100. And I just do the math and I get a single number. Neural nets don't work like that. They have a bunch of like essentially connected neurons that you kind of multiply by different weights and it goes through the system. The reason why they're a little bit more difficult to see is because they don't directly have a one-to-one correlation where they say every bathroom is worth $10,000. There's like a lot of math that happens in the middle, but there's some research being done to make these obvious to humans. A good example would be the GradCam research, which basically it says that if you're having it look at a picture, it can actually put a heat map on top of the picture that shows you what it's looking at. So if I have an algorithm that identifies like cats versus dogs, like I'll highlight the little kitty ears and it'll be like, that's why that's a kitty. I'm looking at the kitty ears. So humans can understand what's doing. And like that's really effective for doctors, right? Doctors don't trust AI unless it can like, explain why it thinks a patient has cancer or something like that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other packages as well that do it for all sorts of other models. So Lime and Shapley are the two most popular ones. So those are locally interpretable model explanations. And then Shapley is just the guy who made it, basically. The problem is these are just orders of magnitude more expensive than the computation. So no one does it, because if you're already spending $20 or $30 million to build a model, no one wants to spend $200 million to see what it's actually doing when it works correctly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, Ragepope, what are your thoughts on AGI risk? Are we about to reach extinction, or is this whole thing kind of silly?
It's just so incredibly silly. We're not even close to it. Like it's just so much fear mongering right now. I think, I don't think we're anywhere close. I know, I guess a decent number of researchers. I'm happy to ask them if they want to come on and talk, but my expectation is this is just so overblown, and it's mostly just because of LLMs, and this is like what was supposedly a human task, but it turns out that linguistics are pretty good. So
yeah. Plus, the one thing that strikes me too is if you look back, a lot of these models are actually a half century old. We just didn't have the compute before. Yep. So essentially, early neural nets are back from like the 70s. Like the algorithm hasn't changed, so we actually understand a lot about how it works. It's just not easily computable on like to the point where like linear regression is.
I guess the cool thing about GPT isn't really the fact that it does all the stuff that it does. The big technological step that was made was basically being able to use large clusters of GPUs to be able to train a single model bigger than like what the video card did. And so I think that's like the very, very cool step that's coming out of it. Not so much that it talks like a human, because it just knows how to imitate a human. It doesn't actually know how to be a human. And I think that's why it shows up when you're talking earlier about a lot of the references. It knows that when it makes a statement, it wants to say like, okay, well, this is by Steve Smith out of his book, whatever. But if it doesn't know, it just knows that, oh, well, this is the expected format. So let's just fill in the blanks with something that could be true. It doesn't have any way to know whether or not something's true or not. So
for the computations using clusters of GPUs, was that something that was enabled by changes in like how we structured the software, or was it actually changes in like the hardware? Was it like tensor cores that enabled that sort of
No,
development?
tensor cores just speed up matrix multiplication. So basically, it just makes it faster. It has to do. Oh, fuck, I can't remember this part. But basically, it's basically when you're writing your code, how you determine command and control over where tasks are going and how to like sync them up across multiple different GPUs, and then enabling the speed between the GPUs to be fast enough so that it was actually worthwhile doing. So the connections between the GPUs, so I guess like back in like the 90s and 2000s, you would have like your crossfire or whatever for your video cards. So you could use like 2 or 3 or 4 at the same time. Well, they've essentially been able to do that basically, but on like a data center scale to get that working together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't remember the specifics, but depending on the algorithm, it either distributes really nicely, or some of them just don't because of like the way the like derivatives and stuff like calculate out.
Yeah, back propagation.
Yep.
And so yeah, so basically instead of needing like, okay, I need a video card with like 50 terabytes of VRAM, well, you can have like 200 video cards hook up together and then work on a single model in a training pass. So
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. What do you think about that forethought?
What do you mean? What do I think about that?
Do you think we're fucked or not?
I'm not an alarmist. I just think that, like, I don't think, like, large language models aren't obviously AGI. But I don't know. It seems like the moment AGI gets deception, the complications of, like, AI safety just get really, really difficult to manage. And I don't know how you deal with that.
I mean, it already has deception, right? It just doesn't even know whether or not it's lying or not because it's just incapable.
What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
You know, sometimes I'm thinking thoughts about things, and other times I'm just, you know, thoughting things about things, you know?
Oh, yeah.
My issue with the AI stuff is it feels very much like econ, where like we could try to make a really accurate prediction, and then have like a lot of indicators for it. But then something completely different might happen, and then we go, oh, well, it's because we weren't accounting for this or that or that or that or that. And then that makes me wonder if any of these predictions for the AI stuff matter. Like, is it possible that there's going to be like a relatively large breakthrough in the way that GPUs communicate with each other in the future that all of a sudden unlocks another algorithm that opens a new branching path that a government wants to fund? Like, stuff like that could open up. And I feel like with a lot of the GPU research stuff, it feels like that's like always a potential that like there's a lot of different technological avenues that could open up that would make it so that now things are like moving at an accelerated pace, basically.
Wouldn't that be a good thing? We're just getting vastly increased compute resources for lower cost, or
well, unless we are worried about like the threat related to the AI is becoming too advanced, then it wouldn't be a good thing, right?
I mean, maybe. I guess if we're going down the sci-fi future, but that just seems like so almost absurd, I guess, to me. It's kind of, you're kind of assigning like the ability for them to just be like the ultimate evil bad guy, and you just don't know when you get there, even if that's like basically an impossible goal. I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel like it. Or like nuclear annihilation. It's like, how do you know when's too much when you're, you know, in conflict with another nuclear power? Because, you know, you could wrestle and you could destroy the entire world, but that's just so exceedingly unlikely. But I guess there's more controls around that.
Oh, man, I feel like the nuclear war analogy is so bad because there were so many unbelievably close calls, and like it's just something that we were flirting with, that like we were in a few cases we were one human being making a decision away from like annihilating most of the living human race.
Well, hold on, I think we also got to be careful too here. I don't think nuclear warfare is supposed to be annihilating the human race, right? Isn't it just something that would be really fucking bad, like we'd blow a lot of shit up? But would it actually be like annihilating human race?
How limited their exchange would be, like 100 nukes versus like 10,000.
Yeah, it depends on what the exchange would be like. If it's like the Cold War, like 2,000 like nuclear missiles being shot at Russia and they're shooting 2,000 back at us, then like you could probably wipe out the planet. Like maybe you
through
would,
what? Through what mean?
Originally in the 90s, it was the idea of a nuclear winter, and our dissolving of the ozone layer that would just basically be able to wipe out the ability for humans to basically farm and just destroy our ecosystem globally. there's been more
If
recent.
we think how many
model-
nukes were fired off in the grand total of the U.S. and the USSR testing nukes?
50 or 60, but I think the biggest one was maybe like a few megatons at a time.
Really, only 50 or 60 nukes on both sides?
No, hold on.
Hold
There
on.
were
So I'm just, I'm checking. Yeah, the United States conducted
1,000 tests,
1,032 tests. The Soviet Union carried out 715 tests. Has that impacted our atmosphere at all?
Parts, I don't know. It depends on where you look, because there are parts of Australia that are now like unlivable because of the nuclear testing.
Is that
was
actually
done.
true? My understanding is that for like nuclear, like fission bombs and stuff, you're not really running into like radiation problems. It's not like a real issue.
Wait,
Yeah, I think
no.
for,
In the Australian outback, the United Kingdom decided to use that as a testing ground for nuclear weapons. And there's just fucking plutonium everywhere because they made really shitty bombs.
Oh, maybe, I guess. Because like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I'm pretty sure their radiation levels today are just like normal, aren't they? It's like
Yeah, they're
whatever.
normal.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Bikini
Hiroshima is like
Atoll-
actually a kind of thriving like small city now.
I think Bikini Atoll is wiped out more or less, or maybe they're returning people now, but it depends on whether or not you're getting complete fusion or fission, I would assume.
But
Yeah,
actually, almost the analogy kind of works because we actually make a pretty big distinction between nuclear weapons technology versus civilian nuclear infrastructure. Even with Iran, which is an extremely unreliable country, and we know they're essentially going for weapons technology, and it's a very easy path from A to B. We still say, okay, you're technically allowed to have civilian nuclear technology, just don't ever enrich any of the uranium.
I thought that wasn't an easy path. I thought that like to enrich uranium, like the infrastructure you need for that is actually far grander than for what you would need for nuclear like power plants. Like you would see, like there would be no way to hide because of how much massive the infrastructure you need is to enrich uranium to that level, that it's a lot different than what you need for just energy.
Yeah, I would say different, but it's almost like a tech tree, if you will, is essentially you say, okay, I already have my civilian infrastructure, I already have my nuclear scientists, now I build this facility, which is obviously for enrichment if anyone can spot it using like intelligence or something like that, and then I go past that path. It's not my area of expertise, though.
Huh. Wow.
Okay. I just think like
Yeah.
AI is like a 5% chance of like annihilating the human race, which I think is like
pretty
a
alarmist.
is small, but not insignificant. But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say exactly 0, but as soon as we start putting numbers on it, right, we might actually be magnitudes of order off. Like 5% versus like 0.05% actually is kind of a really big distinction. And I don't think you could essentially prove to me, it's like, why do we say it's one of those numbers versus the other number?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much just a shot in the dark. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, and I think we should have a conversation in that's based in reality and, you know, kind of like in a neutral tone as to what type of regulations we want to put on here, but not just be too alarmist, especially because like the benefits of AI, like we kind of know off the top, right, is if we use AI in radiology, we'll be able to save lives with cancer detection. Like there's essentially a guarantee that we're going to have superhuman performance for that. We're already right on the cusp of getting that. So, you know, potentially our lives or our parents' lives might get saved because of earlier detection due to the AI. So whenever we're saying, okay, we have these potential negatives, we need to balance them against the very real like benefits that we're going to see in the near term.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. It's just I don't know. It seems like something that is nearly impossible to regulate because you just need enough GPUs to it seems like you just need enough hardware and you can do the research. And there's a lot of countries that are directly in competition with each other for this new technology. So no matter what regulations you want, even if they make sense, it doesn't seem like they could be implemented regardless.
Well, you could do what we're doing to China and cutting them off from GPU access, right? We can just start cutting off undesirable nations from access to our chips and technology.
Well, sure, but how much time does that like really buy you until like they can get some basic chip infrastructure and or get black market infrastructure that they need?
Depending on the country, it could
Years,
just
probably.
literally be forever. Yeah. For China,
Well,
probably not that
when you say
long.
depending on the country, China's probably not going to be one of those countries that's going to be cut off forever, right?
Right.
Yeah, China's AI research, they don't have a lot of like the chip technology based on, but their AI research is pretty strong, internationally speaking.
Yeah.
Well, and this is actually one of the arguments I use in favor of like going faster, is like security through obscurity doesn't really work. So when people are like, oh, don't talk about AI, let's be careful about how much we research, that doesn't seem to work in any other place. Like I have a little bit of a comp sci, or computer security rather, background in like Intel and stuff like that, is like the Diffie-Hellman cryptography, right? In elliptical curve cryptography, we eventually found errors in the way that was implemented in a lot of systems, just due to the fact that everyone was looking at it because there's a published standard and we could see the code. So I would like to see more AI research, including AI safety research, but it needs to be open and we need to actually put money into it, rather than saying, okay, we need to shut it all down until we know what the hell is going on.
Well, the question is, it has to be publicly funded, because you're not going to be able to tell a company that you just spent, I don't know, $400 million like Facebook on like whatever their ad program is or whatever. Now you need to like publish the weights for how you're going to distribute ads to your people, so then everybody else can do the same thing. Like it seems like almost untenable to do anything like that.
I agree. I would say that in some cases we actually can just tell them that they have to do that. Anything with like say criminal justice, I would argue there's a compelling state interest in doing that. But actually, I just want to note, Facebook/Meta has actually been exceedingly helpful and selfless in terms of AI. They developed like the PyTorch library, which is now under its own foundation rather than controlled by Meta directly. They publish a lot of stuff open. Their Whisper model, they open source the weights, and I'm probably going to use that in one of my own projects.